Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into something fascinating. We're exploring the world of the vagina using Naomi Wolf's book, Vagina A New Biography, as our guide.
Yeah, it's quite a journey she takes us on.
It really is. Our goal here is to uncover some of those surprising connections, between the vagina and, well, everything from well-being and creativity to how society sees women. We're going beyond the usual stuff.
Definitely. We'll be looking at history, science, culture, personal stories, the whole gamut that Wolf brings together.
So let's start with some big questions Wolf raises. Like, what if the way a culture talks about and treats the vagina actually tells us something profound about how it treats women?
hmm Or could there genuinely be a link, a tangible one, between, say, vaginal health and how creative or confident a woman feels?
And how has our whole understanding of female sexuality been, well, maybe limited or even distorted by history and culture? Lots to unpack there.
For sure. So where should we start? The brain-vagina connection seems like a core piece.
Absolutely. Let's dive into that. Wolf kicks it off with something really personal, doesn't she?
She does. She talks about her own experience of losing sensation and how that wasn't just, a physical thing. It profoundly affected her mentally, creatively.
Right, like a loss of vitality, a disconnect.
Exactly. And it turned out, eventually, this was linked back to a physical issue, a spinal compression that was actually messing with a pelvic nerve.
Wow. So her personal struggle kind of opened the door to this bigger investigation.
Precisely. It became the jumping off point for exploring this much deeper, often overlooked relationship between the brain and the vagina.
And it's not just anecdotal. She brings in science, like that MRI research from Georgiadis and his team back in 2006.
Yeah, that study was pretty groundbreaking, wasn't it? Showing that during female orgasm, parts of the brain linked to, like, self-awareness actually quiet down.
Think about that for a second. A temporary sort of dissolving of the self, maybe? A melting of boundaries, as Wolf puts it.
hmm Which she then connects to this bigger concept of the sublime, that feeling of awe, of connection to something larger.
Like those peak experiences philosophers talk about.
Exactly. And neuroscientists like Goldman, working with the Dalai Lama, have actually seen biochemical shifts in the brain during similar states involving opioids, things like that.
Okay, so where does the vagina fit into that?
Well, Wolf proposes that women's capacity for multiple orgasms might give them more frequent access, even if briefly, to these kinds of mind states.
So the vagina producing the stimulation for orgasm could actually be evolutionarily linked to accessing these, well, transcendental-like feelings.
That's the idea she explores. It's more than just physical pleasure. It's potentially a pathway to these really profound experiences.
It helps to visualize the anatomy here, like those Netter illustrations showing the nerves.
Oh, yeah, they're amazing. You see this incredible network spreading from the pelvis up the spine, connecting straight to the brain, like a superhighway.
And the key point Wolf highlights, based on those images, is that women's pelvic neural network is significantly more extensive, more branched out than men's.
Right. It's not just denser, it's more diffuse. It's not all concentrated in one or two spots. You've got nerves around the uterus, the bladder, the rectum,
Yeah.
and crucially, the perineum.
The perineum, that area between the anus and the vagina.
Yes. And Wolf emphasizes that this is like its own distinct sexual neural network for women, which makes you think, doesn't it, about practices like episiotomy during childbirth.
Whoa, yeah. If that's a key network routinely cutting it, that could have implications of far beyond just healing from childbirth. It might actually impact sexual response long term.
It certainly raises questions. And this all ties into the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. The body's automatic controls for breathing, heart rate, stuff like that.
And that plays a huge role in female sexual response.
Absolutely critical. For that full sense of release, that complete sexual and emotional experience Wolf talks about, you need optimal ANS activation. Changes in breathing, lubrication, heart rate, the whole body thing.
So it's not just about, like, hitting the right spot.
Not entirely, no. It requires attuned stimulation, patience, paying attention to what she calls activation levels. Our culture often focuses just on the pelvic nerves, but for women, this broader ANS engagement is often the difference between just okay sex and something truly deeply satisfying.
And conversely, stress can shut that system down.
Dramatically. This is where Meston and Gorzalka's work comes in. Bad stress, feeling unsafe, threatened, triggers the fight-or-flight response.
Right, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in.
And when that happens, things like sexual response, which aren't essential for immediate survival, get put on the back burner. They can literally shut down.
And that threat doesn't have to be physical.
Yeah.
Right. Wolf talks about language.
Exactly. Even seemingly casual insults or dismissive comments directed at the vagina can be perceived by the ANS as a threat, having a physiological dampening effect.
That's powerful. And it also means that positive things, things we might not even think of as overtly sexual, can help activate the system.
Yes. Things like gentle touch, words of admiration, just creating a fundamental feeling of safety and being valued.
Mhm.
These all send signals via the ANS. They tell the brain, okay, this is a safe, good environment for intimacy.
Which really challenges that very linear, goal-focused model of sex that's so common. A leads to B leads to C.
Totally. That model often misses the mark for women because it ignores this crucial ANS component and the need for safety and attunement. It explains why a woman might technically have an orgasm, but still feel unfulfilled.
It underscores that point. Female sexuality isn't just a slightly different version of male sexuality.
Not at all. Research like Basson's suggests subjective arousal for women is heavily mental, psychological, and Kama Sutra showed orgasm can even happen mentally despite physical nerve damage.
Mind-blowing, really.
It is. It shows how deeply integrated the mind, emotions, and body are in female sexual experience. Wolf's conclusion here is pretty stark. Despite seeming freedoms, the vagina is often kind of constrained, misunderstood by ideologies that don't grasp its full role.
Okay, so this brain-vagina link, the ANS, it's clearly huge. How does this then connect to things like creativity and confidence?
Well, this is where Wolf starts drawing parallels. She looks back historically at these remarkable women writers, artists, revolutionaries. Think Christina Rossetti, George Eliot, Edith Wharton, Emma Goldman, Georgia O'Keeffe.
Big names.
Right. And she suggests that often periods where they experience some kind of sexual liberation or self-discovery seem to coincide with, or maybe even precede, bursts of incredible creative and intellectual output.
Huh. Like unlocking one thing helped unlock the other.
That's the connection she's exploring. And it's not just historical speculation. She includes anecdotes from contemporary young women.
What do they say?
They describe this link between what they call really good sex, and they're specific about it involving feeling safe, cherished, the whole ANS thing, and afterwards feeling more confident, more creative, seeing connections they didn't see before.
Interesting. Is there a potential biochemical basis for that?
Wolf thinks so. She talks about dopamine, calling it the ultimate feminist chemical.
Why feminist?
Because when it's activated optimally, like through really satisfying sex, it boosts focus, motivation, drive, even resistance to manipulation, things associated with agency.
Wow. And there's a gender difference after orgasm?
Apparently, yes. Men tend to have a dopamine drop, that refractory period. But women, potentially through multiple orgasms, might sustain higher dopamine levels.
Which could fuel that feeling of being switched on creatively and confidently.
Potentially, yeah. And then there's oxytocin,
The love hormone, or as Wolf calls it.
women's emotional superpower. Yeah. We know it's crucial for bonding, feeling calm, being receptive sexual.
But it might do even more.
It seems so. Experiments blocking oxytocin in mother animals showed they'd neglect their young. That's how fundamental it is for connection. Plus, it seems to reduce cravings for addictive substances in studies.
So maybe it taps into that deeper sense of well-being, of meaning, through connection.
That's the implication. It's amazing to think these neurochemicals, so tied to our sexuality, ripple out into creativity, confidence, our very sense of connection.
Okay, this is deep. Let's shift gears a bit and look at how history and culture have shaped how we even think about the vagina. This seems crucial to Wolf's argument.
Absolutely essential. You can't understand the present without looking back. Wolf goes way back to early human history. Cave carvings, those Venus figurines with the exaggerated vulva.
You're right, archaeologists find those all over.
And some historians, like Rian Eisler, interpret these as possible signs of early matriarchal societies, where female fertility, and by extension the vagina, was revered, seen as sacred.
So a symbol of life and power, not shame.
Exactly. And you see echoes of that reverence in various ancient cultures, the Middle East, pre-Christian Europe. Practices like sacred prostitution existed.
But that changed, didn't it?
Massively. The Hebrew tradition, for instance, reacted strongly against that kind of worship. In the 5 books of Moses, those divine unions get recast as abominations. That's a huge shift in perspective.
It really is. How did that play out later in Europe? You mentioned the Sheila Gig figures.
Yeah, those fascinating explicit carvings found on some old churches in Ireland and Britain, and maybe even vaginal symbols carved into medieval cathedral entrances. It's like the old reverence maybe lingered even within newer frameworks.
But then things got more complicated.
Very much so. By the early modern period in the West, Wolff describes the vagina being viewed in contradictory ways, as heaven as hell, or sometimes as just nothing, signifying a kind of female emptiness or lack.
Wow. all at the same time.
Sort of coexisting. Look at the Elizabethan era. Influenced by certain Christian interpretations, the female sex organs could be seen as hideous, hellish. Think Shakespeare sometimes. But you also had classical influences seeing it as a place of pastoral delight.
And they used coded language, right? Like lap or nothing actually meaning vagina.
Yeah, exactly. It shows the anxiety, the difficulty in talking about it directly, this constant push and pull of meaning.
And then came the Victorian era, a time when women were starting to push for more rights.
And yet, paradoxically, there seems to have been this subconscious cultural effort to keep women, especially middle-class women, ignorant about their own bodies, their own sexuality, and to pathologize any exploration.
This is when male-dominated gynecology really took hold.
Yes, you have figures like J. Marion Sims, whose experimental surgeries on enslaved women are now seen as deeply unethical. You have doctors promoting reclining births because it was easier for them, veiled pelvic exams where the woman couldn't even see her own body, and doctors like Acton actively promoting the idea that good women lacked sexual passion.
It sounds like a field operating with a lot of ignorance and stigma.
And that led to harmful treatments based on misinterpretations. Plus, don't forget the clothes. Those corsets and bustles literally reshaped women's bodies, restricted breathing, impacted internal organs, all in the name of modesty.
And this control wasn't just medical or fashion-based, it became political too.
Definitely. Look at the Contagious Diseases Acts in Britain from the 1850s onwards. These allowed the state to forcibly examine and incarcerate women suspected of being prostitutes. It was blatant state control and policing of female sexuality.
Even literature reflected this tension, didn't it? Like George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss.
Yeah, the Red Deeps, that evocative, maybe symbolic landscape representing Maggie's suppressed desires and the dangers associated with them. It's all bubbling onto the surface.
But not everyone was suppressing it. You mentioned the Pre-Raphaelites.
Right, artists like Dante Gabriel Rossetti, they pushed back hard against Victorian prudery. Their paintings often featured quite explicit vaginal iconography, like Rossetti's use of pomegranates. It was a deliberate statement.
A rebellion in art.
Yes, but then the 20th century brought Freud, and that changed everything again.
Freud. Penis envy, the vagina as a site of lack or castration anxiety. Those ideas had massive influence, didn't they?
Huge and long-lasting. And others reacted to him, like Wilhelm Steckel, who controversially suggested feminism was somehow about women denying themselves sexual pleasure, tying their emotional needs directly to sexual responsiveness. It's striking how often female sexual difficulties were blamed on their psychology or social ambitions.
But there was pushback in the early 20th century too, a modernist reclaiming.
There was. You had marital advice writers like Van de Velde starting to talk about female pleasure as important in itself, decoupling sex from just procreation.
And in literature and art.
More directness. Writers like Gertrude Stein, Anais Nin, Henry Miller, though Miller's perspective is often problematic, tackled female sexuality more openly. And performers like Josephine Baker, Loie Fuller. They created powerful new visual languages for female sexuality.
Though male responses still varied wildly, from awe to dismissal.
Absolutely. Think Beckett's chilly awe, D.H. Lawrence's mix of admiration and irritation, Miller's often dismissive pornography. But alongside all that, something really powerful was happening in music.
The blues.
Yes, especially from black female artists like Little Johnson or male artists like Bo Carter addressing female desire. Their lyrics were incredibly direct, using amazing metaphors, bells, coffee grinders, fruit baskets for the vagina and female desire.
And the tone was different from those Victorian narratives.
Completely. It was often strong, positive, demanding satisfaction. There was an assertion of agency, of owning one's desire, even within the brutal context of racism and exploitation these artists faced. It was a stark contrast to the passive victim narrative.
That's a really important counter-narrative. But then, moving into the second wave feminist movement in the 70s, the focus shifted again.
It did. Reacting against Freudian vaginal focus, many feminists, like Anne Cote in The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm, rightly emphasized the importance of the clitoris.
Which was crucial work.
Absolutely. But Wolf suggests that sometimes, in correcting the Freudian error, vaginal pleasure itself was maybe dismissed or seen purely as a patriarchal construct, perhaps leading to a different kind of fragmentation.
And then you had more radical viewpoints, like Andrea Dworkin's.
Yes, viewing penetration as inherently aggressive, the vagina as a vulnerable gash. Those powerful blues metaphors of mutual pleasure and dependency seem to get lost in some of those debates.
So where does that leave us now? Wolf talks about a contemporary reclamation.
Yeah, often focused on humor or tenderness using cute names online, which is fine, but Wolf questions if it goes deep enough, if it really grapples with the brain-vagina connection, the ANS, the historical weight.
Which brings us back to language and perception. How we talk about it matters immensely.
Hugely. Wolf notes how strongly women often react to verbal abuse targeting their vaginas or threats of sexual violence. She suggests this isn't just emotional offense, it might be that ANS threat response kicking in, fight or flight.
We see that kind of language in so many places, workplaces, online.
And science seems to back this up. Remember that study with rats? Bad stress, lowered sex hormones, potentially even affected vaginal tissue. It's physiological.
Wolf even had a personal experience with this, didn't she? Feeling blocked creatively after hearing demeaning language.
Yes,
Yeah.
feeling physically and creatively shut down. It highlights how these cultural narratives, whether the vagina is seen as a sacred jade gate, like in some Eastern traditions, or a gash, or just ignored, get encoded in our brains and affect our actual experience.
So the names we use, the stories we tell, they literally shape reality for women.
That's the argument. And conversely, maybe using more reverent, respectful, appreciative language could positively impact women's openness, creativity, sense of connection.
She even suggests an experiment for the listener.
Yeah,
Ritter.
pay attention to your own gut reaction when reading different descriptions. Compare, say, on Ice Nin's writing about sexuality versus Henry Miller's. How does the language make you feel?
It makes you think about pornography, too. What impact does its often very specific, sometimes aggressive or clinical portrayal have on perception, especially male perception?
Does it desensitize, create distance, or worse? It's complex. We see women online trying to reclaim the narrative with positive terms, but we also see worrying trends, like health issues potentially linked to trying to mimic porn acts.
And the effect of porn on the male brain's reward system, that dopamine hit, Dr. Faust talks about potentially leading to compulsive behavior.
Right. And interestingly, Wolf includes testimonials from men who found reducing porn actually increased their sexual interest in their real-life partners.
It raises that concern about the brain's wiring the closeness of aggression and sexual desire centers. Could porn inadvertently link sex with degradation for some, purely through neurological association?
Wolf suggests it's less a moral failing and more a potential technological manipulation of brain chemistry. Porn becomes the dominant script for intimacy, especially for young people.
And that script often lacks, well, intimacy. It's more about performance or acquisition of sensation.
Exactly. A commercialized view that misses the depth, the connection, the ANS piece we talked about. Wolf points to data showing Western women's happiness hasn't necessarily increased with freedoms, and wonders if unsustainable models of sexuality, influenced by the market and porn, are part of the reason.
It feels like a long way from those ancient views of the vagina as sacred. But Wolf brings in other traditions that held on to that reverence, didn't she? Like Taoism and Tantra.
Yes, offering a stark contrast. In Taoism, the vagina, jade gate, was seen as life-giving, divine. There was emphasis on male skill and care in bringing a woman to orgasm for mutual energetic benefit.
And Tantra.
Tantra also views the vagina, particularly the sacred spot, or G-spot area, as central to connecting sexuality and consciousness. The idea of the goddess within every woman is key.
Wolf actually experienced some of this firsthand, attending a Tantra workshop focused on yoni massage.
Right, and the teaching she describes from people like the Muirs or Mike Lusada emphasize things like cherishing, patience, respect, deep listening to the body, creating that safety.
And the women in these workshops reported different kinds of experiences.
Very different. Talk of feeling amrita, a kind of nectar, and a profound distinction between quick clitoral orgasms and deeper whole-body vaginal orgasms experienced through this kind of attentive touch. Described as more healing, more connecting.
Lusada, the yoni guru she consults, really emphasizes the time difference in arousal, doesn't he?
Yes, how normal quick sex often leaves women unsatisfied because it doesn't allow for that full ANS activation. The need for men to create safety and for women to feel empowered to communicate their needs. He sees connecting with this sexual self as unlocking women's creativity and spirituality.
Which leads neatly into Wolf's concepts of the goddess network and the goddess array. What are those exactly?
Okay, so the goddess network, as she defines it, is basically that whole system we've been talking about, the autonomic nervous system working with the pelvic nerves, the hormones, the brain chemistry, all the bits crucial for female sexual and emotional happiness, the part capable of those transcendent feelings.
And the goddess array.
That's her term for the collection of things drawn from both tantric wisdom and modern science that tend to activate that network. It's what engages the female system on that deeper level.
But it's not a checklist, right? Every woman is different.
Absolutely not prescriptive. She's very clear on that, but it outlines key elements that often contribute.
What kinds of elements are in this array?
Things like patience and compassion being more important than just technique. Making romantic gestures or communicating desire before sex is even on the table, those preparatory tributes.
Creating safety, we keep coming back to that.
Crucial. She gives an example of a woman's physiological response being better in her own home than a sterile lab. Scent is another one. The importance of a partner's natural smell, arousal sense. Research even shows certain smells can increase vaginal engorgement.
Wow, like cucumbers and good and plenty's candy, apparently.
Strange but true. Also, the attraction to dissimilar DNA, except during pregnancy. The relaxing effect of male pheromones. It makes you wonder about that feeling of being married to the wrong man based purely on smell sometimes.
What else is in the array?
Dancing, physical closeness, things often lost in long-term relationships. The need to just be close, smell her partner. Eye-gazing, that deep, trusting connection. Understanding the female stress response, how women might hold on to lower-level stress longer than men, impacting intimacy.
Gottman talks about women moderating conflict. Maybe this adds another layer.
Could be. Then there's specific sacred spot stimulation, focusing on relaxation into the pleasure, not tensing up, which contrasts with a more tension-released clitoral orgasm, though research now shows the G-spot is likely part of the internal clitoral structure anyway.
Communication and feeling and control are key too, presumably.
Definitely. Feeling heard, having the right to guide the experience. Also, acknowledging hormonal shifts, the monthly variability, and how maybe sometimes the appeal of bad boys or certain fantasies could relate to needing good stress. That sympathetic nervous system kick in a safe context.
Like a need for drama or excitement within the relationship?
Yeah, if it's not met positively, maybe women become provocative to generate it.
Yeah.
And finally, she even discusses ejaculate its potential mood-altering components and the psychological signal of intimacy and unprotected sex-boosting bonding hormones.
It's an incredibly rich and detailed picture she paints. So, wrapping this all up, what are the main takeaways?
I think the biggest one is just how much more the vagina is than we usually acknowledge. It's profoundly wired into the brain, influencing emotions, creativity, selfhood, and our understanding has been so heavily shaped, often limited, by cultural and historical forces.
And recognizing this goddess network and the things that activated the goddess array can lead to, well, better experiences for women sexually and beyond.
That's the potential Wolf puts forward. It's about a deeper understanding and respect.
So, a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. If we really took on board these intricate connections, brain, body, emotion, culture, how might a more respectful, informed understanding of the vagina change things? Not just in bedrooms, but in how we value women and their potential in the wider world. What tiny shift in attention, maybe in language or behavior, could you explore after hearing all this?
Lots to think about.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.